The slam of the car door echoed in the quiet street. Daniel hurried towards his house, briefcase in hand. Light spilled from the living room window, painting a warm rectangle on the lawn. He paused, guilt twisting in his gut. Another late night, another missed dinner. He pushed open the door to the smell of roasting chicken. His daughters, 8-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Chloe, were sprawled on the rug, engrossed in a board game. Their faces, lit by the soft glow of a nearby lamp, broke into delighted smiles when they saw him. "Daddy!" Lily squealed, scrambling to her feet. Chloe, though less demonstrative, met him with a bright smile and a hug. He held them close, his heart aching with a mixture of love and remorse. "Sorry I'm late, munchkins," he murmured, kissing their foreheads. Work went long. Lily, ever forgiving, simply squeezed his hand and dragged him towards the table. "We saved you some chicken," she chirped. Dinner was a symphony of childish chatter and laughter. Daniel, despite his fatigue, found himself drawn into their world of make-believe and schoolyard dramas. He cherished these moments, these fleeting glimpses into their lives that he felt constantly on the periphery of. He stole glances at his wife, Eleanor, across the table. She was beautiful, with her auburn hair and emerald eyes, but her expression was unreadable, distant. She barely touched her food, her attention seemingly more focused on her phone than the family around her. Daniel tried to catch her eye, to elicit a smile, but Eleanor remained impassive. He felt a familiar pang of guilt, not just for his absence, but for the growing chasm between them. A chasm he wasn't sure how to bridge. He cleared his throat, pushing aside the unease. "Anything interesting on your phone?" he asked, attempting levity. Eleanor glanced up, her expression guarded. "Just work emails," she replied curtly, returning to her phone. Later, as Daniel tucked the girls into bed, their innocent questions pricked at his conscience. "Why is Mommy always sad, Daddy?" Lily asked, her brow furrowed with concern. He forced a smile, brushing her hair from her eyes. "Mommy's just tired, sweetheart," he murmured, hoping his voice didn't betray the lie. But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Eleanor's sadness ran deeper than fatigue. It was a coldness that had seeped into their home, chilling their once warm relationship. He kissed Lily goodnight, then peeked into Chloe's room. She was pretending to be asleep, but he caught the glimmer of her open eyes in the darkness. He sat on the edge of her bed, his hand resting on her back. "You okay, pumpkin?" he whispered. Chloe hesitated, then sat up, her face etched with worry. "Mommy's been acting weird," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's always whispering on the phone, and she gets mad when I ask who she's talking to." Daniel's gut churned with suspicion. He'd tried to ignore the late-night phone calls, the hushed conversations, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne that clung to Eleanor. But denial offered little comfort now. The evidence, however circumstantial, was mounting. He tried to focus on work, but the image of Eleanor's guarded expression, the fear in Chloe's eyes, haunted him. The weight of his suspicions, coupled with the guilt of his own failings, was a heavy burden to bear. One evening, while pretending to work late, Daniel followed Eleanor. He watched from a distance as she met a man at a dimly lit bar. Seeing them together, their laughter echoing in the night, confirmed his worst fears. Betrayal cut through him like a shard of ice. The drive home was a blur. He barely registered the traffic, the honking of horns. All he could see was their faces, hear their laughter, feel the sting of their betrayal. A dangerous cocktail of anger and resentment began to brew within him. Section 5. A dish best served cold. The following days were a blur of barely suppressed rage and carefully constructed facades. Daniel continued his routine, playing the part of the dutiful husband and father, all the while nursing the venomous thoughts that festered within. He began to channel his anger into an elaborate plan. It started subtly, a carefully chosen ingredient here, a longer than usual time spent in the kitchen there. He told Eleanor he was trying new recipes, wanting to contribute more to the household. She seemed indifferent, her attention elsewhere. One evening, Daniel found himself alone in the kitchen, the aroma of simmering spices filling the air. He was preparing a traditional family recipe, one passed down from his grandmother. But tonight, the familiar act felt different, imbued with a chilling purpose. As he stirred the pot, his gaze fell upon a vial tucked away in the back of the spice rack. It contained a potent poison, a family heirloom he'd once promised himself he would never use. His hand hovered over it, his heart pounding in his chest. Section 6. The Silence Before the Storm. Dinner was a tense affair. The silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware, was heavy with unspoken words and simmering tension. Daniel watched as Eleanor ate mechanically, her gaze distant. He'd laced her food with a small dose of the poison, just enough to make her ill, to inflict a taste of the pain she had caused him. It was a cowardly act, he knew, but revenge rarely wore the mask of courage. Lily, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, chattered about her day at school. Chloe, however, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. She ate quietly, her eyes darting between her parents. Daniel pushed the food around his plate, his appetite gone. He couldn't bring himself to meet his daughter's eyes, knowing the darkness that lurked beneath his carefully constructed facade. The weight of his actions, the poison that lingered in the air, threatened to suffocate him. Section 7. Twisted Intentions. Unforeseen Consequences. As the meal progressed, Lily, usually a hearty eater, pushed her plate away. "My tummy hurts," she whimpered, her face pale. Daniel's blood ran cold. He'd calculated the dosage carefully, ensuring it was only enough to affect an adult. Had Lily somehow eaten some of Eleanor's food? Panic swelled in his chest as he watched Lily clutch her stomach, her small body racked with pain. Eleanor, finally shaken from her indifference, rushed to Lily's side, her face etched with concern. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice frantic. Chloe's eyes widened in alarm as she looked from Lily to her parents. "Daddy, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His carefully constructed facade crumbled. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer an explanation, but no words came out. Section 8. Crumbling Walls, Broken Family. The room spun as chaos descended. Eleanor, her voice shrill with panic, called for an ambulance. Daniel watched in horror as paramedics swarmed the house, their faces grim. His world, the carefully constructed life he'd built, was collapsing around him. He rode with Lily in the ambulance, his guilt and fear a suffocating presence. He tried to reach for her, to offer comfort, but she recoiled from his touch, her eyes filled with a betrayal that mirrored his own. At the hospital, the waiting seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Each tick of the clock was a hammer blow to his conscience. Eleanor, her face pale and drawn, ignored him, her gaze fixed on the double doors that led to the emergency room. Hours later, a doctor emerged, his expression grave. Lily was stable, he explained, but they'd discovered traces of a potent toxin in her system. The police, alerted by the hospital, were waiting to question them. Section 9. A Father's Despair. The interrogation room was cold, the stark fluorescent lighting amplifying the despair that gnawed at Daniel's insides. He confessed everything, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt and shame. He told them about his suspicions, about his anger, about the poison. He held nothing back, hoping that by confessing, by revealing the depths of his depravity, he could somehow atone for the harm he'd inflicted on his daughter. But his words rang hollow even to his own ears. As he sat there, shackled by his own remorse, a chilling realization washed over him. He had been so blinded by his own pain, his own thirst for revenge, that he had failed to see the truth. He had condemned Eleanor in his mind, had woven a narrative of betrayal without ever seeking her side of the story. And in his blind rage, he had almost sacrificed the one thing that truly mattered, his daughter's life. The thought pierced him like a shard of ice, leaving him hollow and broken. Section 10. Aftermath. The trial was a blur. He pleaded guilty to all charges, accepting full responsibility for his actions. He watched from the defendant's table as Eleanor, her face etched with pain and disillusionment, testified against him. He saw the flicker of hurt and betrayal in Chloe's eyes as she recounted the events of that night. He had shattered their family, their lives, in a fit of blind rage. And now, he was paying the price. Sentenced to a lengthy prison term, he was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. The guilt and remorse were his constant companions, a heavy cloak he knew he would carry for the rest of his days. In the quiet solitude of his cell, stripped of everything he held dear, Daniel finally understood the true cost of his revenge. It wasn't measured in years behind bars, but in the shattered trust of his daughters, the irreparable damage he had inflicted on his family. And that, he knew, was a debt he could never repay.